All right. So now this is another very important topic, and it has to do with the judiciary. And you'll recall last week when we talked about the structure of the federal government, that the judiciary is one of the three branches. But when they wrote the Constitution, it wasn't really clear what the purpose of the judiciary was. Okay, and the one of the reasons why it wasn't really clear was because it wasn't clear that the federal government had the right to interpret the Constitution. Okay, uh, there were, as you guys will recall, I said there were a number of states that believed that they should be the final um, word on what was constitutional and what wasn't, and basically that if the states saw that a federal law was against their interest, they could just ignore it or they could nullify it, right? Um, and so we have this background conflict of those who believe in the supremacy of the federal government and those who believe in the supremacy of the state government, right? And into the middle of this, we come with John Adams. John Adams, when he leaves office, uh, basically decides to pack the courts with Federalist judges. And so they pass the Federalist Congress as one of its last measures is going to expand the judiciary so that the federal court system, so that essentially that Adams can appoint uh, a number of Federalists to the judiciary, which will mean that the Federalists at least have control of one branch of the government. Okay, so those people who think, oh well, the Supreme Court and the court system is supposed to be non-political, well, it's always been political, right? And the reason why it's always been political is because the justices or judges in the judicial system are all appointed by the president, and the president is political. You guys get what I'm saying? But the kind of the caveat there is that once a person has been appointed to the judiciary, they serve for life. So if you appoint somebody that's, say, in their 40s or 50s, they could serve for 20, 30 years, right? Whereas the president can only serve for 4 years at a time, and congressmen only two, right? You follow what I'm saying? All right. So these political appointments to the judiciary have long-term effects. That's one of the things that we'll notice as we go forward in your lifetimes is going to be uh, that essentially the Trump administration was able to do almost the same thing that Adams did. What really happened was that the Republicans refused uh, to confirm nominees to the court until Trump was president, and then once he was president, they filled the court system with very conservative justices, and those conservative justices are going to be on the court for 20 or 30 years. You guys follow what I'm saying? So this is going to have a long-term effect. All right. I'm not saying it's going to be a good effect or bad effect. I'm just saying that's going to have a long-term effect, right? Okay, so what happens then is that Adams appoints a number of justices right at the end of his term. This is where we come up with the term lame duck. You've heard of lame duck before, right? A lame duck is somebody that is still in power but is not going to be reelected, right? So the last 2 months of Trump's term were his lame duck period, right? And the lame duck period is a politically safe zone because you can do things without having to pay a political price, right? And this is when you'll see presidents start to pardon people. It's not just presidents. I mean, governors and people like that, right? They'll pardon people that are unpopular, things like that, because they know they don't have to pay a political price for it. Okay, and so one of the things that Adams does is during this lame duck period, he makes a number of appointments, a large number of appointments to the judicial. And he was busy doing it all the way up until midnight on the day that Jefferson was going to be inaugurated. Okay, and so they sorry, so they call these judges midnight judges, right? Because they were still signing their commissions at midnight. But once midnight had passed, they could no longer sign those commissions, right? And so there was a guy, and his name was Marbury. I always forget his first name. It may have been James, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Marbury was appointed to a position of Justice of the Peace in Maryland by the Adams administration, but his commission was never signed. Sorry. And when Jefferson became president, he told his Secretary of State, James Madison, to stop signing them, stop signing the commissions. And then the Judiciary Act, where they expanded the judiciary in 1801, was repealed by the new Republican Congress, Democratic Republican Congress, right? And so all of those new judge positions that had been created are now rescinded. They're not there anymore, right? And so what had really happened here was that this guy Marbury had been promised a job by the federal government, but he never got the job because they never signed the commission. And so he sued in court, and it made its way through the court system until it got to the Supreme Court. Okay, and what happened in the Supreme Court was that the Supreme Court ruled that Marbury should have gotten his job, but that the court didn't have jurisdiction. So it sounds like a weird kind of outcome, because really, if you think about it, Jefferson really, in a way, lost. But he also won. I mean, the guy Marbury never got the job, so in that way, but he lost in a bigger way, because what it did was set the precedent for the Supreme Court to be the final judge of what's constitutional and what isn't. The Supreme Court versus the state. And so this really gives an enormous amount of power to the federal government through the Supreme Court. You follow what I'm saying here? Because that's the tradition. That's where we come up with our idea, the tradition of judicial review. Judicial review means that the Supreme Court basically is the final arbiter of what is constitutional and what isn't. And it's not the states. Okay? You guys follow what I'm saying here? So this is an important incident, right? In this case, Marbury versus Madison. Okay, you guys get what I'm saying here? Questions, comments? Now, John Marshall was Thomas' cousin, but they didn't agree politically. And one of the things that you will notice is that Marshall was on the court until 1835, and Jefferson was in office until 1808. So you can see Marshall was put on the court by Adams, and he stayed there for 34 years, whereas both Adams and Jefferson were dead while Marshall was still on the court. You guys get what I'm saying? So this is the effect of these appointments to the federal court system. You guys follow me here? And that's why so many people, when there is an election, people start talking about, well, if so-and-so becomes president, they're going to do something such and such to the court system. And that will have a long-term effect. That's why it's so important. You guys are with me? Questions, comments about any of this?